John Madden's doing the color on our alumni game. So says St. Peter, and this is Will O'Toole welcoming you to the first edition of 2022 Park Ridge Sports History. And this week we're going to concentrate on the passing of a beloved figure in the NFL, basically in all sorts, really America itself, and that is the legendary coach John Madden. And I'd like to take as much time as I can to really talk about, everyone knows his broadcasting career, but really he was a terrific on-field coach for the Oakland Raiders. And I'd like to get into that. Some controversies, and I know that people always thought he couldn't win the big game and all the rest of it. He did struggle with the Raiders to do that, but he eventually reaches the promised land in 1976-77 with a thrashing of the Minnesota Vikings in the Rose Bowl in Pasadena, California. So I'd like to get into that a little bit, but I have to say this. No qualms about it. I never liked Madden as a coach. I never liked the Raiders growing up. I was, pretty much a huge Cowboy fan. I would like to show you this, though. Here is Madden on the sidelines. I would say this is probably circa 1969, 1970. And as I recall, I remember, the Raiders were kind of a fun team in retrospect. No, they were definitely the villains, really of Shakespeare quality, which really led to everything about them. The irony is Al Davis made those colors, the black and silver. He modeled those after a team up at West Point, the Army Black Knights of the Hudson. So I think he was trying to regale his franchise as a good guy, heroic. And in fact, the silver and black turned into everything in a bad Western. The guy wearing the black hat and the six shooters at his side, and always pulling out another one whenever he needed it. That's how the Raiders were. There were some, what would I say, controversial moments in the Oakland Raiders under John Madden in his history. But looking back, Madden was a really good coach. He really was everything good about what we see in football and in America. Here's a guy, never could make it, let's just say, as an NFL player. I think he lasted 1 year with the Philadelphia Eagles way back when, and took up coaching and became a marvelous coach. Now, I'm going to get into this a little bit later about the naysayers and all the rest of it, but I will tell you, the fact I never liked the Raiders, I never liked Madden. He just always made me mad on the sidelines as a kid, because I was doing some studying on his career. And even that's kind of controversial with the number of wins and winning percentage. But Madden always seemed to me a guy who was complaining, and yet it always looked like he was he looked like a supervisor or the manager of your local ShopRite with the short sleeves. I always remember it as being striped or white shirts, and he always seemed to have a tie, as I remember wearing. He just looked with sneakers. He always had sneakers on, and let's say Hager slacks for a better, but he always looked like your local ShopRite manager. And that's not, I'm not disparaging any ShopRite workers at all. I had a few of those type of jobs, but he never seemed to embrace that Wall Street look that we see so often now in many of our basketball coaches on the sidelines, right? With the Italian suits, everything dapper with the cufflinks and all the rest of it. He just looked like your ShopRite guy who did this as a part-time job, being the coach, and of course then turned it into a great career with the Raiders. But anyway, let me get into this, because it's been fascinating when I was doing the Raiders and doing my research on this. And if I digress, I do. And as I always tell other people who watch the show, it's like we are sitting at a bar and we are just reminiscing about sports, and one thing leads you, I remember that game. Oh, do you remember this? Yeah, I remember this. Or I think he played another sport. Do you remember when they made it to the Final Four? That type of thing. I'm going to try to keep it on the Raiders and specifically Madden, but let's just take a look at this. First of all, Madden had 103 wins in the NFL versus only 32 losses. And I think he had several ties, 7 ties. Now, and I'm using Football Reference. Football Reference gives him, he started out technically in the AFL. All right. He takes over for a guy by the name of John Rock. Apparently Rock, or Rout, could not get along with, John Rock, who was a pretty decent coach. You know, he was 25-3 his prior 2 seasons, leading, of course, the Raiders to the Super Bowl, their first one against the Green Bay Packers. But he simply couldn't put up with Al Davis. He was like the early George Steinbrenner. And Davis, of course, did coach a while without the same success that Rauch or later on Madden would have. And so Madden is inserted in the Raiders head coaching spot and immediately goes 12-1-1. They make it in 1969. They lose, of course, to Kansas City in the playoffs. And but this signals, ready for this, Madden would never lose more than 5 games in a season until his last year as an NFL coach. He goes 9-7. Not only that, he leads the Raiders 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times. He gets double figures in wins, and he never wins fewer than 8 games in any season. Now, people say, well, that means he went 8-8. No. This is 70-71. Ironically, I even have to do a study of this. Do you realize that Madden led the Raiders to back-to-back identical seasons in 70 and 71? They finished 8-4-2 both years. I have not seen, and now as I say that, in 66 and 65, the Raiders finished with identical records of 8-5-1. But I've yet to see a team finish 8-4-2 2 consecutive years in a row. So now I have to throw that trivia out the window as I'm just looking down and I see that the Raiders basically did the same thing in 66 and 65 when they went 8-5-1 both times. But here's the deal there. The irony is the Raiders lost in the playoffs in 1970 to the Baltimore Colts. And in 71, they don't even make the playoffs with identical records. Kind of wild. 8-4-2. Anyway, and then it just explodes for him. All right, he goes to the playoffs. Actually, I think 71 and his last year are the only 2 seasons that he ever missed the playoffs. And even in 78, when the NFL expanded to 16 games, I think he lost 2 of his last 3 that season. In fact, I do have it here. I think he lost 2 of his last 3, or they could have made the playoffs. And in fact, irony of irony, in 78, he lost to Denver, New England, Denver again, and Miami. Those are 4 playoff teams. We'll get into that in a little bit. They all make the playoffs. And he does beat Minnesota, the team he beat the year before, or a couple of years before, in the Super Bowl. And that actually is his last victory in the NFL. And he finishes the season 9-7 and just misses out basically on the playoffs. I think he was they lost to Denver. Denver finished 11-5, but think about it. I think he lost 2 of his last 3 that year. Had he won those, now you might be talking about 10-6, maybe a wild card and all the rest of it. Regardless, he had an outstanding season and a career. As I said, here's the irony of all ironies. Football Reference that I use has him marked down with 103 wins and having the highest winning percentage of any NFL coach. Now, we are talking about Philadelphia lawyers, nickel-dime stuff here. Wikipedia has an NFL coach with the Green Bay Packers as having the highest winning percentage of all time. And it's not Curly Neal. And I'm just going to look it up real quick. Highest winning percentage. I had it, and I apologize. But anyway, I'll get it to you next week. Madden All right, finishes with 103 wins, 32 losses, and 7 ties. What I liked about Madden was this. Yeah, true. Maybe he doesn't beat or win the big game. He does finally, defeating Minnesota in really a blowout game. Minnesota was clearly never in that game. In fact, the last touchdown was scored by a defensive back, cornerback Willie Brown. He ran all the way for a touchdown. I think it was like 75 yards, really making the score 18. Didn't really matter. Even if they had won that game by 11, it wasn't even as close as that score indicated, because the Raiders were just, if you watch that game, they were just all over the place. But what I was looking at with Oakland, here's the deal. I know a lot of people might be critical of Matt. First of all, let's just do this before I take a look at his career. Let's just say this. Madden leaves the game. And from what I understood, probably the game did finally take a toll on him mentally and physically. He probably just had to leave. I heard recently Dick Vermeil say the same thing. He was working 18 hours, 20 hours, sometimes sleeping off. That's not, to me, healthy in any kind of job where you're doing that. Unless maybe if you are just starting up a business. But for the most part, working 18 to 20 hours and you're sleeping at the office, and I'm sure many of these coaches are doing that. I tell you, sometimes you got to step back and say what's healthy for yourself. Madden does. And really, I laugh about this because he thought broadcasters didn't know anything about sports, which may be true. Even guys who do these podcasts may know nothing about sports. We can just, maybe spout off some stats and give you a fact here and there and say Oakland used to be the home of the Raiders and all the rest. But really, how much do we know about the inner workings of sports unless you're actually coaching it? And he felt that way about a number of broadcasters. In fact, when I was reading about it, he felt that way about Howard Cosell. Anyway, he decides to get into broadcasting. And this is really where his kind of Norman Rockwell appeal really ignites, and really is the genesis of his appeal to all Americans, not just to Oakland fans and people like me who are anti-Madden and anti-Raiders growing up. All of a sudden, just loved listening to him. And the reason being, and I did write an article about this, he really brought an Americana feeling to broadcasting. And what we were thinking at home, watching two guys smash helmets and go, ooh, he was actually articulating that on the airwaves. And it resonated with people. And that's why, my cartoon with the bang and the doink, and he came up with the term, and I snot knocker. He really made probably part of our vocabulary for sports, blue collar or lunch pail kind of guys. He did have, remember that turkey, the Thanksgiving Day game, or where we have an all-star team of all the players on Thanksgiving who had great games either for Detroit, Dallas, or their opponents. So he really brought a lot of Americana to the broadcasts of an American game. And what I did really appreciate about Madden as a broadcaster was the fact this. I always felt he was predicting plays or what teams should do before they run the play. I so much prefer that more because now when I'm watching the game, it's almost like I'm playing chess with the broadcaster and I'm playing chess alongside with the head coach. Hey, it's 3rd and 3. We've been running the ball very well. Do we go back and pass or do we run, a draw play up the gut? And Madden would say, here's what I would do. I'm not saying he did it on every play, but he would announce his intentions about what he would do as a coach and maybe even as a fan, even from a perspective of a player, because the good players do anticipate and they say, this is what we should be doing. All right. This is what we should be doing on this play. I hope we do this and all the rest of it. And I think that resonated with fans because now it wasn't, hey, you know what? Now I'm going to criticize the player or I'm going to criticize the play after it didn't get the 3 yards. It's so easy to do. Me, I'd rather have a guy saying, this is what Madden was like. I'd run a draw play. If he got stuffed, if he got hammered and he lost 2 yards and he said, well, I made the wrong decision. I can live with that as a fan back home because at least he's being honest. He's not being critical of the coach after the play. He's saying, this is what I would do. Boom. If it works, it works. If it doesn't. And I always felt he was very uplifting, even in his criticisms, however few they were of players or coaches. I think he got that. I think that most people want to watch a game and really just sit back and enjoy watching and trying to figure out the strategies of both coaches and have fun with the different players and admire the players. And he would just flat out say, man, this guy's going to be a great player, or this guy, he's having a terrific year. And all of a sudden you would bring players who you never heard about, and all of a sudden they were in the limelight and starting to get maybe the headlines and the attention that they deserved. This was Madden to me. And to be fair, when you think about it, if it didn't resonate with the public, why are all the computer games named after Madden? They weren't called Pat Summerall. And that's not a knock on Summerall. He was a brilliant play-by-play. Really enjoyed him too. And he was a perfect fit with Madden. But nobody's calling it Al Michaels, 2022. Nobody's calling it Troy Aikman 2021. All right? It's called Madden for a reason. He was fun. He was verbose. He was animated. You could see what he was doing. You could see, even sitting down in a broadcast, you could see his tie probably whirling around in the broadcast booth. You could see that his shirt tail was hanging out. You could see him probably wearing those same sneakers that he wore 10 years previous in the 76 Super Bowl. He was just a joy to listen to. And he never overtalked. He really let the game and the flow of the game really, really influence about what he was going to say. Now, that being stated, let's get to his coaching career. And as I said, when Madden came in, all right, I would have to say, with the exception of Bill Belichick today, who's my favorite guy to caricature when I do cartoons. And in fact, I don't think I've ever done one for Park Grid, so I'll have to think about doing one in the future because I do love creating Belichick cartoons. But think about it. All of the characters of the NFL, particularly with NFL head coaches, were from 40 years ago. Think about it. Tom Landry, the stoic cowboy. Now, many people didn't like his demeanor, but he was known for that fedora hat. Then you had Shula on the sidelines, right? Really a guy who rose from the fact that probably lost the most infamous game in Baltimore, Indianapolis Colt history. And then really got redemption by leading the Miami Dolphins to that unbeaten season. And then, of course, the Super Bowl victory over the Washington Redskins. Then you have, of course, Vince Lombardi, right? Who is a caricature, and a personality unto himself. Of course, you have Hank Stram. You have Bud Grant, more like, I would say, Bud Grant was more like, who I grew to like quite a bit. Bud Grant, who was more like Tom Landry than he was the other characters. And of course, you have Chuck Noll. I mean, in the 60s and in the 70s, you have a plethora of NFL coaches who are just like your gym teacher or who are just like your high school coach. Today, if I can make a complaint, they're too corporate. They are. They're too corporate. None of them are really thinking outside the box, with probably the exception of Belichick. And you can say, no, you got it all wrong. What about this guy? What about this guy? There are many guys that I can put basically in a basket here, and they're all the same. Then I can put a group, and they're all the same here. The guys that we grew up with, and maybe I'm too bad if I sound old-aged here or an old frump at 61, but they had some fun to them. they had a little bit of personality. Too much today, it's we can't let our guard down and have the enemy or the opponents find out what we're going to do or what we're thinking and all the rest of it. Seemed to me that in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, you had these guys who, if they weren't coaching, like I said, they might be managing a ShopRite or a Pathmark, or they might be working in the steel mills, or they might be working as an assembly line guy or a product developer for some company. But none of those coaches in the 60s and 70s. And they had great acumen for the game. They had great strategies for football. And they could think X's and O's just as good as any of the players today. But none of them would be considered a computer dweeb coming up with some sort of formula. None of them had, the colored charts. None of them had the headphones on. None of them had eyes in the sky. I mean, Belichick does today, but it's been one of those things. It's like a tidal wave. You just drowned in all that stuff. But think about it. Here's Madden on the sidelines. This is not him throwing a tantrum. This is how he actually coached. There's no headphone. There's no game plan in front of him that he's looking and saying, all right, what play do I want here? No, he's fun and free living here. Okay. That's how many of the coaches were. And it really resonated with the fans. I mean, I can't really name 4 or 5 coaches offhand today in the NFL unless I'm looking at Football Reference, simply because I got to be honest with you, they don't have the personality that the guys did years ago. They're not fun. And to their defense, they can't be that fun. They have to be more corporate. Man, I'd rather have the guys just go out there in a suit and tie and just run it that way, but their uniform today is, we wear the gear that says Oakland Raider, Las Vegas Raider. We've got the headphones. And if they really want to look cool, they pull them down behind their thing and then they put them up and then they put them down. They've got 62,000 folders with all different color coded plays that they never use. They go back down to the same 6 or 7 anyway in a game. It seems that way. And they got, like I said, the eyes in the sky, and really they're losing touch with, I think, the blue collar fan. That's something that Madden never lost. That real appeal to just the guy who wants to sit there on a Sunday afternoon and just watch some football, be entertained, root for his team, listen to what the broadcaster says. He doesn't need him talking. He doesn't need him talking like a relative at Thanksgiving in one ear and out the other. He just wants to be left alone, have a can of beer, a slice of pizza, some chips, and watch the game and be entertained, root for his team, and listen to Madden talk about or maybe even predict what's going to happen on the play. Anyway, 20 minutes in, I want to get into Madden. And here's the thing. When Madden takes over, yes, here's the criticism of Madden by many pundits, is that he was really, or inherited, a playoff team that couldn't get over the top. Okay, mind you, as I stated, when he came in the previous year, the 67 and 68 Raiders won 25 games against 3 losses in just the AFL. He comes in the following year and goes 12-1-1. They do lose in the championship to Kansas City, which goes on to win the Super Bowl in 1970. And, of course, then the NFL and the AFL officially merge, even though that had been rumored and had already taken place a couple of years prior to that. This was where the formal realignment of the NFL comes. And then you have an NFC and an AFC with Baltimore, Pittsburgh, and Cleveland moving to the AFC, and then the creation of conferences and all the rest of it, and divisions. All right. He continues to win. And here's the thing that people don't realize is that during his whole time, do you realize that the highest pick he ever got in the first round was number 19? And he took Henry Lawrence. Now, the only reason I know this off the top that I didn't have to refer, I was looking at this, and that many of the players that he got were in the late stages of the first round. One of the things that they do, and this was some of the fun things, even a guy like Darryl LaMonica, basically Madden's first quarterback, And there is Madden with Darryl LaMonica, who I always kind of liked. And he's another guy that got hurt quite a bit and was replaced, of course, by the ageless wonder George Blanda. But I liked LaMonica. He went to Notre Dame, of course. He played with Buffalo, I think, a little bit. He had been drafted by the NFL, but the Oakland Raiders kind of suited him. But he never got them to the promised land. In fact, there were a couple of championship games where he got hurt that Blanda had to take over. This was the guy, Ken the Snake Stabler, who got Madden to the promised land. And he was the general who led the Raiders to victory in the Super Bowl. I think it was 9. I wish I knew my Roman numerals better, but he was the one who throttled the Minnesota Vikings. But Stabler, LaMonica, I wouldn't put them in the realm of Brady or Montana. I don't even know if I would. Wow, I'm probably going to anger a lot, but too bad. I'm probably going to anger quite a bit of Raider fans when I say this. He might not even be Stabler and LaMonica might not be in the same. Well, certainly not LaMonica, but Stabler, he might not be in the same realm as Bradshaw. And I know. I can see the Raider fans going crazy on me already. What are you talking about? You don't know. But Bradshaw won 4 Super Bowls, and they had some wars, the Raiders and the Steelers, some vicious wars. And I was looking, and I'm going to compare notes. I'm going to do some research. But anyway, going on, and I'll come back to that. Here is what I always remember with John Madden, who always seemed to be yelling and screaming on the sidelines. I was looking at his 103 wins, and I wrote this in the article. Do you realize he, as a kid, and of course this is always as a kid what you're looking at, seemed to me he was always complaining and whining about some play, and it seemed that it was late stages of the game. He already had the game won. What are you complaining about? Let's just get off the field. Even then I knew that. Do you realize that 52 of his 103 wins, Madden won by more than 10 points? That's really incredible. That's almost 50% of his wins were by, and that's not including playoffs, by the way. That was just regular season. So he won 52 of 103 games by double digits, 10 points or more. Now, normally the average I think they do every year, I think it's fewer than a touchdown, fewer than 7 points decides a game. So he is upwards and above that. And then I was looking at his, let's say, you know how they have wins above replacement in sports? Well, they also have this adjusted win loss, what their expected win and loss. And basically each year, Madden, with the exception of 2 years in his 10, he was above or exceeded win expectation. And I believe he finished his career with like a +7 in wins expectation. So obviously he could coach. And everybody who thinks that he was able to get the best players, put it this way, the NFL works at just the opposite. And many of his great players were kind of like rejects from other teams or never even were looked at by the NFL. I just gave you one, really, LaMonica, who had been traded or acquired from, I believe, Buffalo. And then here's Stabler. I was looking at Stabler, and it seemed like Stabler, I don't know whether he had, I have to look into this a little bit more. Stabler came up as like a 26-year-old. He had played at Alabama. And then I don't know whether he was hurt or he had, let's say, some Army obligations. Because remember back in the 60s, I remember players having to leave, let's say, during the season, especially baseball. And they had, let's say, 2 weeks of military service that they had to leave the team for. And I'm just wondering if the same thing happened to Stabler. I don't think so. I know that, like Namath, he had some injuries, especially to his knees. But Stabler was not seen as, well, he was just a winner. Okay? Stabler was a winner. I never rooted for him, but he always found a way to beat me. I can remember the one year, actually it was the Raider year that they won the whole thing. They were losing the entire game to New England. And New England had throttled them early in the season. And New England came in as a wild card. And they were winning the game throughout. And Oakland found a way to win. I think it was this. They got a break and got like an offside against New England and had a redo on a down, got the first down, and then took the lead for good. But they wound up beating New England. I remember doing an article for school claiming that the Raiders had cheated, that they had paid off the refs and all the rest of it, because there was a couple of controversial calls in that game that went in favor of the Raiders instead of usually going against the Raiders. And we'll get into that 72 debacle too for all you Raider fans out there. But here's a couple other guys. Fred Belitnikov, ironically, has to be one of my top 3 wide receivers of all time, along with Drew Pearson and probably Jerry Rice. I just loved Fred Belitnikov. He was about 6 foot, average. I always thought he had average speed. I just think that he was one of those guys that was a possession receiver, as they like to call them. But he wore a lot of goo and he wore a lot of tape, as you can see in this one photo of him. He was taped up from the wrist all the way up to here. And he would put goo on, stick them. And of course, that's been outlawed. They outlaw the goo, but they allow for these gloves that are like magnets for the ball. I mean, it's just unbelievable. And really, the reason why, they don't like the football to get dirty. And of course, this is 00, Jim Otto. I always thought he was one of the coolest guys. Again, I never rooted for the Raiders, but I always thought he was kind of cool because Jim Otto, you spelled his name O-T-T-O, and of course, his number was 00, something you'll probably never see in the NFL again, because they do have numbering issues where linemen have to wear a set number, quarterbacks have to wear a set number, wide receivers, etc. You'll never probably see another 00. The game really has taken a toll on Jim Otto, by the way. I remember reading an article about him. So many injuries. I think he has so many mechanical moving parts in his body. Double knee surgery, hip, everything. The game really took its toll on Jim Otto. He is a Hall of Famer. So is Fred Belitnikov. Here's another picture I love of Belitnikov, because Belitnikov always seemed to be permanently going bald. He had that little tuft right in the front. Kind of reminded me of a golf course where you have that one little tuft before you have the fairway. But he was a great receiver. Maybe he's not in the same realm as the players today, but I always thought he was clutch. And he does have a touchdown pass reception in the Super Bowl against Minnesota. Now, here are the guys I remember as Hall of Famers too. Art Shell, who I believe is also their first black head coach in Raider history. I believe it was Art Shell. And he, with Gene Upshaw, really cemented that front line. It was what was interesting too, when we were growing up, you seem to have offensive lines that stayed together. And you could even name the offensive line, like Mick Tingelhoff of Minnesota, and Dave Manders of the center for the Cowboys, Ralph Neely right next to him, Rayfield Wright right next to him. Seemed like, and I loved how the Cowboys get up and go down, seemed like there were two things that we always remembered. The offensive linemen, who are so overlooked even in today's game. And if you have a great unit like the Hogs were with Washington, obviously you're going to win a lot. And they used to nickname the defenses. The last team I think that had a nickname was Seattle's Boom. All right, the Legion of Boom or Legion of Doom. I even forget that. But when we were growing up, you had the no-name defense. You had the over-the-hill gang of Washington, the Redskins unit. The no-name defense was the Dolphins. You had the Doomsday Defense of the Cowboys. You had the Purple People Eaters of the Vikings, of course. The Raiders never had a nickname per se, but boy, did they have guys on that team. And they were led by one of the great steals in NFL history, and that was Willie Brown being acquired by Oakland from Denver. I'm looking at this today as to why Denver would ever trade not only just an All-Pro and a future Hall of Famer, Willie Brown, but a guy not only trading him, but it wasn't like he was 35 years old. You're talking about a guy who was about 26, so he was still maybe in the prime of his career. Maybe it slowed down a little bit. Okay, I'll give you that. But Willie Brown was traded by Denver to Oakland, and like Oakland fleeced them because it wasn't even like Oakland gave him a great player or great draft picks. Remember, even back then, Oakland was not drafting real high even in the AFL draft because they were on the bottom because they were winning all the time. We get into that, but Willie Brown, they basically stole. It's a trade that nobody ever talks about, and you realize, wow, they really stole him. And I love this. This is Willie Brown's the back of the card. This is things that I love about the old Topps cards. They have the guy painting, and it says this: Willie was once Denver's top rookies in 1963. His speed, aggressiveness, and mobility earned him a starting role for the Bronx. A real rock'em sock'em kind of player, and that's true. Willie is a coach's dream. He does go on to coach. Great things are anticipated for this hard-hitting back this year. He led the Broncos in pass receptions in 1964. And it says here, Willie enjoys painting and drawing. I mean, as I saw this, I wasn't even thinking about this as much as the back of the page, and I just love the artist with the thumb and all the rest of it. But even here, this little paragraph really has this player in a nutshell, along with his statistics and all the rest of it, which I just love. I love when they give them at 6'1", 240, and all the rest of it. Some of these guys are just beasts, you know. And Willie Brown, he does go on to coach, both in the college and in the pros. He is an All-Pro. He is a Hall of Famer, and he was probably one of the greatest steals in Raider history. And he was one of the foundation blocks for their Raider playoffs and eventually their Raider Super Bowl. And of course, how can I forget this guy? Otis Systrom. He had an interesting story. I always wanted to see. I remember SI running a picture of him. And of course, it's Alex Karras, who was a play-by-play or the color man for ABC Monday Night Football, who gave him the school. He's an alumnus of the University of Mars. I always thought it was really, really funny. I don't know whether you'd be able to get away with it today, the University of Mars, but the thing was, you had to see him. He had his helmet off. It was a cold night, and the smoke was coming out of his head. And of course, he had a very animated look to him. The funny thing is, the Mars stood for Marines. And this player, Otis, never went to college. In fact, after he left high school, and I think he only played like 2 years of high school, he goes into the military. And I think it was the Marine Corps. And after that, he was playing in one of those minor league kind of football things, you know, for beer money on the weekend. He was scouted and discovered, except that the team that scouted him, and I'm going to say it's LA. I want to say it's the Rams. They knew about him, but it was the Raiders who signed him. And basically, he stays 7 years and is really another brick in their great defense. You know, the Raiders didn't have a nickname, but man, they had a nasty defense. One of the things that was a trademark of them was that they led the league all the time in penalties, but I think those penalties really put a scare in the opponents. Now, they didn't have, as I said, the great nicknames, the Purple People Eaters and the Silver Rush, let's say, of Detroit, or the Doomsday Defense of the Cowboys, but they had some great players. And in fact, Ted Hendricks is a Hall of Fame player. And I didn't realize this. I knew he played. Let me see if I can find him up here. And I don't have a picture. Yes, I do. You had the great Ted Hendricks, had one of the greatest nicknames in sports, and that is the Stork. He was called the Stork. He played on 3 Super Bowl championship teams. I did not know that. He went to the University of Miami. He was 6'7", and he was about 240. And he acquired the nickname because I keep doing this. If you take a look, his neck was exceedingly long, and he did the way that he played. He looked like a mad stork out there. Not just a good player, Hall of Famer. And of course, I can't go beyond this show without mentioning 2 guys, and this is how I always remember the Raiders. That's Big Ben Davidson, who had the big handlebar mustache, and of course, the ageless wonder. I think I said that twice today, but I really do mean it for George Blanda. George Blanda, what a career he had. Played for the Bears, the Oilers, the Raiders. Famous for, he had a few comeback victories in 1970. I recall, even though the Raiders don't make the playoffs they do make the playoffs that year. Lombardi got hurt. He had to come in and relieve him. And he was just a great player. So he's a Hall of Famer. But of course, the Raiders acquire him late in his career. It's not like they got him at the age of 22 and they make him into a Hall of Famer. And this is what I mean. Ben Davidson, they basically got him off the refuge pile. And he has an outstanding career. I always thought he would make the Hall of Fame. He doesn't. He was just, but he embodied everything about the Raiders in the 60s and early 70s. He doesn't, obviously, he is retired before they win the Super Bowl. He is in the Super Bowl against the Packers. But these were the kind of players that the Raiders had. Not true superstars, but guys like Madden turned them into super players. I don't think any of these players today, all right, there's not a scout today that would say that these players are, let's say, more talented than some of our great ones. But, guys like Madden brought them together. Guys like Madden built them into a team. And guys like Madden made him into a winner. This is Park Ridge Sports History. I'm Will O'Toole, celebrating the life of John Madden. And I thank you for joining us again. Have a great first week of the new year. Bye now.